My friend's mom and I were trapped in a bank. And she said, "You deserve a reward," including me. The first shot sounded like a firework that had forgotten how to celebrate. The second had the weight of intention. I was at the red light on Lincoln Street with a thermos of black coffee in the cup holder and an envelope of cash tucked under my seat. Doing an errand for Mr. Miller that his distrust of wires and passwords called business. I could have rolled through the green when it came. Instead, I saw movement through the bank's glass, the staccato of bodies crouching. A muzzle flash like a lightning bug with a grudge. And Sophia, my best friend's mother, standing very still with a gun at her back. Sophia in daylight always looked composed, like the kind of woman who could walk into a board meeting, a parent-teacher conference, or a leaking kitchen and make the room remember its job. She had a practiced calm, not ice but warmth that holds. We'd met when I was 12, a permanent guest in her backyard, a boy who ate her peaches like medicine. She never made me feel like a burglar in her refrigerator. She had that gift for rescue that looks like hospitality. Now, behind the glass, her eyes found mine. There wasn't panic there. There was a measured hope, a question on a thin wire. The sirens were late but coming. I could have driven away. Mr. Miller's envelope was not important enough to get me killed. But I killed the engine, checked that the cash was hidden, and cut across the street toward the service alley. The back door was old metal with a padlock that remembered better years. My fingers remembered worse. The lock gave up with a sigh. Inside smelled like paper cuts and toner and a winter that had overstayed. Fluorescent lights blinked the tired blink of a night shift. I moved behind the teller line and took a knee. 4 men, masks, weapons, one loud, 2 steady, one young in the way that speaks with shoulders before words. The young one let his gaze loiter on Sophia as if attention were a right. I measured the distance to the fire exit, measured the odds, and got a number I didn't like. Then a boot scuffed behind me. I didn't hear the full sentence because the butt of a shotgun is a punctuation mark that removes clauses. The world tipped, narrowed, widened again. I was on a rough carpet that gave me burns across my pride. Zip ties sang their plastic song around my wrists. The room was a small office with a flickering light and a desk that had known exactly zero fun. A security guard bled discreetly. 2 tellers prayed with their eyes open. And Sophia, 3 feet away, her back to the wall, her knees drawn up just enough to balance without signaling surrender. We couldn't talk. We did the next best thing. We learned a language with one gesture. Her fingers on the carpet twitched once. I answered with a curl of mine. The sentence was simple. I'm here. It slowed my pulse from stampede to canter. The leader barked into a radio. The young one prowled. He crouched by Sophia and tried a line like he was practicing for a mirror. She ignored the performance and looked toward the middle distance where dignity lives. I made the error of being a person. Leave her alone, I said. The slap wasn't creative, just effective. It shocked a gasp out of someone else. It shocked a look out of Sophia that wasn't for herself but for me. And that did worse damage. An older voice cut the room clean. Focus. We're not playing games. The young guy rocked back on his heels, angry at being pulled off stage. Sirens swelled like rain. The leader tilted his head, listening as if he recognized the song and hated it. Change of plan, he said, in the tone of a man moving furniture. We're taking them with us. He split us as if splitting us would split the world's attention. 4 of us were shoved toward a white cargo van, 3 toward a dark SUV. Sophia and I were among the 4. The van smelled like old rags and mechanic's breath. The doors shut and the dark turned solid. I think we'll get one break, I whispered, as if fear could overhear. Her nod was the smallest permission. The young robber rode in back with us, his weapon across his knees and his attention across every other surface. He tapped the rifle like a drummer who never learned quiet. The van lurched into motion. A metal toolbox slid. I let it bump my ankle, let it slide again, and thought about physics as a religion. Sirens grew into proximity. The driver cursed. Something like a roadblock existed where the map hoped there was none. The leader yelled and the van answered with a scream and then a pop. Tires have complicated feelings when they're shot. We fishtail Ed into a guardrail and the universe offered chaos like a gift. The toolbox became a projectile and the young robber became a man with a shin. His rifle bounced. The world filled with smoke and swearing. I threw my shoulder into the rear doors and felt the latch yield a reluctant inch. "Now," I said, and the word contained everything I had the nerve to promise. We hit asphalt, then air, then the animal smell of rain that had decided to begin. We ran bent in half toward a warehouse that had forgotten its purpose. Inside was dust thick enough to keep secrets. Dogs and men practiced orders in the alley. The warehouse offered a trapdoor disguised as shame. We folded ourselves down a stair into a basement that smelled like mildew and old chores. The dark became less like a wall and more like a blanket. We sat shoulder to shoulder with our backs against cool concrete, the denim over her like a borrowed roof. Rain beat a steady pattern on the tin. Patient, insistent, the kind of rhythm that slows your breathing even if you didn't mean to. Her shiver found its way into my bones and then back into hers. A quiet exchange of weather between two bodies out of adrenaline. "Is this still okay?" I asked, my voice careful, as if a louder word might tip the shelves. She turned so I could see her profile in the dim, the slow lift of her breath. "Yes," she said, and then, almost a smile, "but go slow." We learned each other with the patience of people threading a needle in failing light. My palm moved along the safe geography first, elbow, forearm, hand, checking for the small flinch that means not there and the even smaller stillness that means more. Her fingers mapped the same care along my shoulder, over the tired ladder of my ribs, pausing when my breath snagged and waiting until it came back smooth. Every touch was a question. Every answer was given twice, once with a nod and once with the way muscles softened under a hand. When our mouths met, it wasn't victory, it was relief, like finding the right switch in a dark room and hearing the soft hum of a lamp. She tasted of rain and courage and the dry salt of a day that had asked too much. I felt the small tremor at her throat and rested my lips there until it eased. Counting silently with her, 1, 2, 3, steady. Her fingers found my jaw and held me as if to say stay with me. And I said I am here by not letting go. We lay down on the tarp with the jacket spread wide. The way you lay out a map before choosing a road. The floor was unkind, but the drum of water turned the room into shelter, the kind that is more about who you are with than what it keeps out. I drew the denim higher over her shoulders and felt her lean. A deliberate weight, as if resting could be a gift one person gives another. The heat we made was small at first, like cupped hands around a match, then it learned how to live on its own. There was no hurry in it. I kept time with her breath, slowing when she paused, waiting when she listened to herself, moving again only when her hand returned to my back with that light pressure that said now. She traced the tired ache along my spine as if she could smooth the day out with her fingertips. I followed the line of her shoulder with my lips and felt gooseflesh rise and fall like a tide that had decided to forgive the moon. When I asked again, "Still okay?" she made a sound that was yes and thank you. And I let the sound anchor me. Thoughts came and went, the van's spin, rubber leaving rim, the shout I didn't finish. Each broke like foam against the simple fact of her hand at my neck. The catch and release of her breath at my ear. The way our legs found a shared angle that made the hard floor irrelevant. The day drained out of me the way rain runs off a roof once it remembers gravity. In its place, a steadier thing. A warmth that wasn't the opposite of cold but its answer. When the wave finally moved through us, first her, then me, or maybe both at once like a chord, it felt less like an event and more like something in us had agreed to unlock. No fireworks, no thunder, just a long exhale that unknotted places I hadn't known I was clenching. She shivered once, twice, and I pressed my mouth to her temple and counted again until the aftershocks turned into a hum. We lay there breathing, not as two chests rising and falling but as one system that had figured out the math. Shame didn't come, neither did triumph. What arrived instead was the small, profound rightness of a choice made in patience. I thought of Caleb, my friend. Her son, and knew this moment would be ours. Not as a betrayal but as a truth we would protect until it could stand daylight without flinching. The thought didn't sour anything. It sharpened my gratitude and set the boundary for it. She tucked herself beneath my chin and I pulled the jacket higher. "Thank you for asking," she murmured, meaning every time. "Thank you for answering," I said into her hair. Tasting metal, rain, and something like relief. Outside, the dogs had gone. Voices thinned to the occasional instruction. The storm loosened. The ceiling stopped sounding like a drum and started sounding like a clock. We drifted in and out of a shallow sleep, surfacing whenever the cold reached a new inch of skin, sinking again when shared heat found it. When I woke to the faint bruise of dawn assembling around the edges of the trapdoor. She was watching me with the quiet focus of someone memorizing a page before the book is taken away. "You're still here," she said, not as surprise but as inventory. "I'm still here," I said, "as long as you want me here." She smiled, small and certain, and slid her hand into mine, our fingers interlacing with the confident ease of a thing tried and found good. Above us, boots hit wet ground. A voice called to another voice. She squeezed once, "Ready?" and I returned it, "Ready," and that was how we rose to meet the morning. A sergeant with a beard that had seen better coffee squinted down the stair and asked if we were okay in the voice of someone who already knew we weren't but hoped we would be. An EMT wrapped us each in wool that scratched and felt like mercy. In the ambulance, we sat with blankets touching and didn't narrate the night to anyone who hadn't earned it. "I owe you my life," she said, watching the pine tops flicker past the rear windows. "You already have mine," I said, and heard it land in the space where easy answers go to die. We didn't kiss then, we had learned the labor of quiet. At the hospital, questions arrived with clipboards. We answered in the grammar of facts. There would be charges and arraignments and statements. There would be Caleb, my friend, her son, the boy whose backyard had been my summer. There would be the problem of saying enough and not too much. There would be what came after. After looked like the waiting room at 2 in the afternoon with a plastic fern and a vending machine that dispensed pretzels like apologies. Caleb drove in like a storm that had to be done by dinner. He hugged his mother with his entire spine, then looked at me with the gaze of a man who has learned to read maps and mistakes. "Thank you," he said. It cracked something gentle open in me. We didn't tell him about the basement. We told him about the bank and the van and the way rain can erase a scent if you give it enough roof. He put his hand on my shoulder. Not a warning, not a blessing. Something in between that felt like trust under construction. News moved through town like weather. People who had known me as the boy who changed their oil learned a new story to tell over eggs. Some stories are better at breakfast than others. Mr. Miller slapped my back, muttered about hazard pay, and slid an envelope across the counter without comment. I told him I was taking a few days off to return my heart rate to a socially acceptable value. He nodded and changed the subject to screws. As if the world made sense once you could name the threads. Sophia and I kept the facts friendly and the silences kind. We didn't make grand declarations. We didn't put our mouths where the town could see. But if my jacket lived for a while on the back of her kitchen chair, if my coffee showed up in her cupboard, if she began to leave the porch light on past midnight because she'd gotten used to another set of keys on the hallway table, nobody had to testify. Caleb texted once from campus, "You good? Tell Mom I'm coming home this weekend." I wrote back, "Good. She's making cobbler." He sent a thumbs up and then, an hour later, "Without you she'd probably tell me not to come because she'd be too busy pretending to be fine." We saw each other most days because the ordinary insisted on it. The bank reopened within a week with new glass and a different air. The cops found the last of the men by the river with the patient efficiency of people whose job is to keep a community from learning fear too fluently. We gave statements again. We bought groceries. We remembered to eat. And sometimes, at the edge of evening, when light through her kitchen window made everything look honest, I would find her looking at me as if gratitude had become a language she could nearly speak. "What do we call this?" I asked once, not to label, but to keep our courage from hiding behind euphemism. A beginning, she said, then, after a beat, and a boundary. She smiled. I'm still Caleb's mother. I know, I said. I was his friend before I was your anything. We told him together 2 weeks later on the porch steps. So he wouldn't feel outflanked by news. We told him we'd been through a thing together, and a tenderness had begun. And we were moving at a pace designed to keep faith with all the versions of our lives that mattered. He rubbed the heel of his hand along his jaw the way he does when he's talking himself out of saying something he'll regret. I don't want to be the referee, he said. I want to be the guy you invite to dinner where nobody walks on eggshells. Deal, I said. Deal, she said, stealing my echo with a grin. On the first rain after, I stood with her in the doorway and listened to my own heart calm. The gutter made its little song. The mailbox leaned. We didn't speak about the basement. We let the present be larger than the past by a comfortable inch. When she touched my wrist, briefly, it felt like punctuation landing in the right place. There were setbacks. A clerk at the grocery asked too bright how our heroes were doing and managed to make hero sound like criminal. A neighbor said she admired Sophia's bravery, in the tone women recognize as policing. I got a letter from an insurance company that had the gall to call me a claimant as if my life had been a paperwork problem. We laughed when we could. And when we couldn't, we washed dishes in hot water and let our hands find something simple to do. We also had good small things. A pie that turned out better than the recipe had any right to. A movie whose ending wasn't as smart as we were but tried hard. A night on the couch where our feet touched and we learned the art of rest that isn't sleep. The first time she dozed with her head on my chest, I stayed awake longer than necessary and memorized the weight. Because I've learned how quickly blessing can convince itself it was a dream. I don't know what you think a reward is. The night in the basement didn't feel like a prize handed to me for courage. It felt like two people who had stood at the edge and then stepped back and chose to be tender while the storm continued elsewhere. It felt like a thank you that didn't require indebtedness. It felt like mercy that didn't have to be deserved to be real. Months later, when the worst had faded into the batch of stories you tell only when the room has earned them, we drove past the bank together. The new glass was so clean it didn't have a personality yet. She said, sometimes I think about the moment I saw you through the window and how my body decided to believe you would stay. I saw you see me. I said, it was like being named. She reached across the console and took my hand like something she'd done before and would do again. You still deserve a reward, she said, quoting herself with a smile. I lifted her hand to my mouth. I already have one, I said, and she rolled her eyes in that affectionate way that means a person has learned where his metaphors should end. If you're waiting for scandal, for a town to turn on us, for a son to choose sides, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The most dramatic thing that happened next was the dog learning to sit and the porch bulb outliving its predicted hours. There is a peace that arrives not with trumpets but with the absence of requirements. We stepped into it together. And on some evenings, when the rain returns with its soft percussion and the river, somewhere out there, goes on with its old work of moving time along, we sit on the porch and hold hands the way people do who know the name and shape of the danger they survived and choose. Again, to be gentle in a world that keeps proving it isn't obligated to be.